back into this special edition of Young Turks. I'm Shireen Bhan and we're coming to you live from Mumbai. We're at the Lightspeed Ventures Lift-Off event. What is that exactly? It's Lightspeed's effort at trying to get their portfolio companies, other investors, and of course other constituents of the startup ecosystem together to chart out a roadmap for potential growth as well as for investment. Joining me now to talk about whether we are actually seeing a lift-off or not is Bejul Somaia. Bejul, great to have you back on Young Turks. Thanks so much for joining us. Rahul, it's a pleasure to welcome you back on Young Turks, and Harsha, it's great to see you here as well. So let's start with that. Lift off, quite literally, Bejul?
You know, our job is to try and help our companies accelerate. And we constantly think about what we can do to help them do that. One of the most important things is to connect them with downstream sources of capital in a non-transactional environment. So this really is an opportunity for those companies to get to know investors and vice versa without the agenda of a financing or capital raise.
Rahul, you've got all the numbers. How many meetings have taken place? Who's meeting whom? You know, what are the conversations about?
Well, we've had about 37 of our companies do 248 meetings today with about 150 investors.
So this is really speed dating, isn't it?
Yeah, well, hopefully it results in matrimony sometime. But yes, it's been incredible. I think, look, I think our teams have done an incredible job at bringing together these constituents together. As Bejul described, in a non-transactional environment where they get to know these companies, get educated about what they're doing, what they're attempting, and and engage in a very fruitful dialogue. In addition, sometime later this evening, we will have other members of the ecosystem, you know, our peer funds, bankers, and others join us as well, almost for like an evening of celebration.
Well, you know, since we're talking about celebration, Harsha, let's talk about what you believe is different this time around. This is the second year that you're bringing this ecosystem together. You did Lift-Off last year as well. Contextually, what's the big change that you see in terms of mood, in terms of confidence when you speak with people?
I mean, let's be honest, right? Like overall, macro has not been great, and everybody knows that at least last year we saw, in terms of investments, it was literally a 70% drop, right? In early stage as well as growth stage investments. Obviously, for a lot of startups, the question is, hey, are investors thinking differently? I think this is an opportunity for everybody to just, you know, get one-on-one and talk about these things openly and really understand what's going on. And I think in terms of what's not different is the same as last year, right? Like the idea is for all of these investors to get to know our companies better and to understand more deeply what they're building in a slightly more informal setup with some touches of formality. But I think overall, everybody understands it's a different environment. It's an opportunity to learn on both ends, I think.
You know, let's address the learnings, but let's also address the environment, Bejul. And we spoke barely a month ago. Look, it continues to be challenging at this point in time. And you were very clear. You don't believe that we're past the pain yet. You do think that we will need to go through some more. Since we last spoke, there's of course been more trouble at Bejul. There's been trouble now at Paytm as well. From a confidence perspective, has that shaken things even more?
I think in the near term, events like that will definitely shake confidence. What we have to remember, though, is those two events, even though they're happening somewhat, around the same time, they're actually very different events. Right? And so I think this is where it's important to maintain the perspective of there's lots of other companies in the innovation economy, and when you just zoom out, that economy continues to thrive. What I mean by that is, I've attended, I think, 3 or 4 board meetings over the last 10 days in India. Strong teams are really building stronger businesses in this environment. Because they have to, there's no choice.
Yeah.
And so in a sense, when capital markets act in this way, although it's painful, it does serve a purpose. And I think founders are incredibly good at adapting, responding to the signals they're getting, and emerging stronger. We see that across the portfolio. That's what causes us to remain very committed and, and believers in this ecosystem. But it's never going to be a straight line. We are going to see events like the ones we're seeing. Wish we didn't. But the reality is we see those in other markets as well.
It may not be specific to India, but what does that do in general to risk aversion? Do you believe that, given the fact that these are the large companies that we're talking about, one of course is listed as well, does this further sort of put the brakes as far as investors wanting to write out checks at this point in time and say, look, let's just wait and see how all of this was to play out?
I don't think so, Shireen. I think investors that understand India and want to invest in India will seek to understand these, right? As opposed to concluding very quickly that, we shouldn't invest in this market. And as they seek to understand this, I think they will understand that, as it relates to Paytm, there's a certain set of issues. As it relates to Bejul, those are very different, and then form their own opinions about what that means. For example, I've heard some people take away that what's happening at Bejul is a reflection on EdTech. We don't think it's a reflection on EdTech more broadly. So everyone will reach their conclusions. The folks that are committed to India, I think, will unpack that. In a world where there's a lot of geopolitical risk, there has been risk aversion towards technology, there has been risk aversion towards the emerging markets. For people that are a little bit risk off in any case, this will be one more reason to validate that position. But I don't think that's everyone.
Rahul, let's talk about what you are believers in and what you intend to invest in. And let's talk about what's happening as far as this whole move towards generative AI and the generative AI adoption is concerned. I was speaking with Satya Nadella yesterday, and he said he's never seen anything like this in terms of just the rate of diffusion. As you speak with companies that you're invested in and potentially likely to invest in, what are you picking up on the ways of which the AI adoption is likely to take off?
Sure. So look, I think one of the interesting things for us to remember is we are in the very early days of the AI cycle. Yes, there is a ton of hype today in the cycle, but the few of us who are deeply embedded in the ecosystem realize this is unlike a lot of sort of micro optimizations that you would have seen. This is truly changing how a lot of things are done, right? Now that has impact in 2 or 3 different things. One, it has an impact on productivity. A lot of companies are working on co-pilots that assist their employees and make them a lot more efficient. It's impacting companies in domains like IT services, etc., which are essentially solving for efficiency historically by offshoring, but now accelerating that efficiency using offshoring and the combination of AI. In addition, there are 2 other areas where we see this impacting. One is in terms of creativity, content creation. You've obviously seen the likes of Midjourney, DALL-E, etc. That is significantly bringing down time and productivity of creativity. We in fact have a company called Pocket FM which leverages AI deeply in order to be able to do that. And then the third is progressively we are seeing that enterprises will be using this in order to do a lot more, I will call it mechanical tasks, a lot better. This will include efficiency in things like financial services, etc. So I would say at this point of time, we are limited by, I would say, the imagination on what all this could do. Again, these are very early days of the hype cycle, so you hear a lot more noise than reality. But people like us who are very strong believers that this is a lasting trend are sort of going all in into this.
Well, limited only by imagination and not limited by capital. So what are we talking about at this point in time?
That's the part of the hype cycle. That's the part of the hype cycle, and I can assure you capital is not limited for AI for sure at this point of time. Starting from the Valley and of course more recently in India, I mean, we invested in a company called Sarvam, which is building, sort of foundational models and so on and so forth, right? So I would say for the right team, trying to build the right thing, I think capital is the last of worries that people will have, at least for AI.
And specifically, Bejul and Rahul and Harsha, all 3 of you maybe could chip in on this. Where do you believe that India is today? And I go back again to the conversation that I had with Satya yesterday, and he said through the last 4 big sort of paradigm shifts, tech shifts, India perhaps had some impedance, and there may have been a lag between adoption globally versus India, but he believes that that may not necessarily be the case when it comes to AI. Are you seeing that?
Yeah, I mean, look, he also spoke about 2 million Indians to be trained on AI, right? Now, fact of the matter is that when you build large data models on which large data sets on which these models will be trained, you need a large number of people who are providing those data sets, right? So in some sense, I would actually say we have some sense of advantage thanks to our population. I will still say technical talent is a lot more concentrated in the valley. You will find those teams rarer in India, but when you do find those teams, you will see them build products that are equally world-class.
Harsha, on the consumer tech side as well as the climate tech side, because that's something that you're now deeply committed to as well. What's looking exciting, and do you believe that 2024 is going to be a sort of big breakout year on either of these two fronts? Anything new on the consumer tech side?
Well, on consumer tech side, to be honest, we're starting to see some early signs of sort of generative AI coming up in the application layer. So you're seeing that happen a lot, which is relatively new. I think another thing that has at least caught my fancy off late is gaming. I do think that's a massive wave in this region. Just to share a few stats, I mean, about 50% of India's internet users are already gamers.
And women, I mean, that was a pretty interesting statistic that I saw,
Yeah, and a large percentage is women. And historically, people have thought that the Indian consumer won't pay. We're starting to see very clear signs of that changing, right? And especially with micropayments. And another data I was looking at the other day was average in-app purchases in India have gone up from $6 to $13 in just 3 years. This is 3 years data. If you look at just gaming market, a game like BGMI, I think was relaunched in May last year. And within 6 months, already hit a revenue run rate of $60 million in India alone. And so I think this narrative that an Indian user doesn't pay is changing very rapidly. And it's only enabled with UPI and micropayments. And the minute I layer generative AI on top of it, the amount you can do with games, how much you can automate live ops, have more content, very customized, personalized, going out to users, and actually encourage users to pay more because of it. And I think the opportunity is massive. It's about a $2 billion. It was about a $2 billion market. Maybe 2-3 years ago, it's projected to go to $5 billion by 25.
But the regulatory overhang with this whole GST business of 28%.
Yeah.
I mean, till a couple of months ago, everyone was talking about an existential crisis for the Indian gaming industry. You don't believe that's the case?
I don't think it's an existential crisis. Yes, for real money gaming, that was true to some extent for some time, but it hasn't stopped founders from starting up. It hasn't stopped innovators from innovating, and I don't think it's stopping investors from investing in this space. It is definitely a wave. It's picking up, and I'm personally very excited about it.
Well, that's interesting to hear. So the big call there coming in as far as online gaming is concerned. But Bejul, let's address the regulatory issues and challenges that many sectors are faced with, and let's talk about fintech as well, because there have been changes over the past 12 months that the regulator has brought in, ostensibly from a security and a safety perspective, but that has certainly slowed things down, hasn't it?
It has. In fintech, it certainly has. And one of the risks that us as investors we find very difficult to dimension is what we call stroke of pen risk, where a regulator or a government can in a sense change the rules. And
is it higher in India?
It depends. Higher than where?
For the other markets that you're investing in, Southeast Asia, for instance.
I think it's higher. It's certainly higher in India than in the U.S. Southeast Asia is many different countries. So I think I would say Singapore perhaps is lower, but as you move into Indonesia and the Philippines and Vietnam, I would say it's high. As we've all seen, for perhaps a decade or a decade and a half, that risk in China felt like it was somewhat theoretical.
Yeah, but now it's very
until
real.
It wasn't, right? And we've
Yeah.
seen whether it was again in the education sector, the supplemental education sector in China,
or gaming,
and then the internet industry. And so I think these are very real risks. They're very top of mind for investors. And so when we invest, understanding a particular regulatory regime, now it has to evolve, but I think some of the changes as it relates to financial technology, it certainly has caused us to be more careful. I know in speaking to many of our peers, I think that there is a higher degree of risk aversion relative to the last 5 years, when if you look at where capital went, Fintech was a very significant recipient of innovation and risk capital.
Rahul, let's talk about opportunities, and let's also talk about the bets that people made. For instance, this will be India's answer to TikTok, this will be India's answer to Instagram, and so on and so forth. And many of those bets haven't quite played out. Why do you believe that's the case? And two, as you look at the environment today, as you look at the argument that Harsha presented on the ability for the regular Indian to actually pay for services, to pay for in-app purchases and so on and so forth, what do you believe that opens up in terms of monetization?
Yeah. A while back, Bejul published something where he said India is not for everyone.
Not for the faint-hearted.
Not for the faint-hearted, right. That equally applies to our products, right? I think India as an audience, while we have a large number of people, I think the requirements that you need to build are incredibly different. And when you therefore talk about products like these, you need equal amounts of strong product and strong distribution. It is not one or the other, right? Now, of course, you're not going to go head to head versus the big tech on very large distribution. But the starting point has to be a product that uniquely works for this audience. And therefore, because the ARPUs of this audience are much lower, you need to innovate on payment systems which allow for you to tap into the low ARPU audience, right? So Harsha spoke a little bit about micropayments. We've seen, at least on two companies, ShareChat and Pocket FM, micropayments transforming the financial model of these companies because they've been able to innovate on these. Now, when you combine that with strong distribution is when you really start to see takeoff happening. Or rather, let me correct myself.
Lift off. I was waiting for that.
Okay. Plugged.
Well done.
Yeah. So I think that India needs very India-specific or India-first thinking. I think it's difficult to imagine global products coming and straight away doing really well. I mean, if you take a step back, Instagram started Reels first in India.
Yeah.
Right. That's a product that started here first and is now like a global phenomenon. Now, we do have local innovators who are attempting this and not just big tech, and we continue to believe there will be a ton of these happening here.
Harsha, again, to just extend that argument and look at the various opportunities. I mean, just yesterday, for instance, Virat Kohli snapping ties, his 8-year association with Puma, going the route of an Indian startup and, of course, investing in that as well, getting into the whole athleisure market. Again, from this sort of consumption story, the larger consumption story perspective, what looks good to you?
In general, we're finding that, and I guess this is a point that people talk about often, right? That there is fundamental premiumization of Indian consumer that's happening across sectors, right? So, and nothing, no area is limited, right? Very recently, I was actually talking to a company that is trying to organize this whole aspect of sort of going to mandirs, right? When you go to mandir and you do chadhava and what happens there, pretty much everything is getting covered with a layer of either convenience or quality or premiumization. And the Indian consumer is getting more and more open to this idea, right? And we're seeing that across sectors. And as a result, you'll also see sort of, even from a startup standpoint, you'll probably see a ton of investments happening in brands in this country, which you probably never saw historically as much, right? If I just look at last year, actually, to your point, Fintech was the sector that saw the most investments, followed by commerce, followed by brands. And so I think both the Indian consumer and the Indian investor has woken up to this idea that the consumer is getting sort of more and more brand oriented and is looking for premium and quality products wherever they go. And that's just a broader trend that we're seeing.
No, and absolutely, we're seeing that play out, and the D2C explosion that we've seen over the last few years is only picking up further steep. But Bejul, let's talk about this from India for the world theme, which is something that you guys have been betting on as well. How is that playing out today? I mean, outside of SaaS, which has of course been well documented, etc. Where does it have legs today?
Yeah, I think so. As you said, it started with SaaS, and I think that in a sense is now approaching some level of maturity. We've seen it in commerce, specifically in business-to-business commerce, where companies are connecting supply in India and the Southeast Asia region with demand in the US and other Western countries across verticals. We have companies like Zetwork in the machining space, MStack in specialty chemicals, and Global Fair in construction. And there's no reason actually that marketplaces need to be geographically constrained. They're not constrained in the US around state borders. There's no reason really they need to be constrained by international borders. So that's a category. We are seeing more activity in cross-border payments, right, which is really related to the digital footprint expanding. And then finally, companies like Pocket, which Harsha is involved with, where really a very significant part of their revenue expansion has come from selling into the US market. So we're still positive on this. It typically tends to be more confident founders who are sort of prepared to take that on, but we see more and more of this theme.
Rahul, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, globally, I would say we are a big franchise investor in cross-border commerce. We are, in the US, very large investors in Fair, which has demonstrated that, this can be built. And I think the interesting tailwind that's allowing us to bet more significantly on this is the fact that, through 2020 and 2021, everyone saw like large-scale supply disruptions, essentially because there was one factory in the world, which was China.
Yeah.
Right now, everyone wants to de-risk their supply chains, isolate themselves versus, bullwhip effects that go through the supply chain, and therefore, we stand in a great position, and with the government rapidly pushing manufacturing in India. The bolder founders are saying, okay, look, we have high quality supply. What value addition can we do on top, and then move this to the world? It's happening both horizontally, examples like Zetwork, and more vertically, companies like MStack, Global Fair, Zyod, and so on and so forth. So big believers in this theme, and we believe, this is, some people have said India's manufacturing's decade, and therefore I think we stand a very good chance.
Well, yes, we've been hoping for India's manufacturing breakout moment, and by all accounts, I think consensus is that this could. I mean, if we don't get it right this time around, this is the window where everything seems to be lined up in favor. Let me get wrap-up comments, and I'll start with you, Harsha. As you look down the year in terms of the ability to fundraise, in terms of large checks being written out, IPOs. What's the prognosis?
At least, we believe it will be a relatively slower market compared to the previous years, certainly compared to the whole COVID phase. Last year was slow. We expect this year to be similar. Having said that, at least early stage capital does exist. There's enough liquidity in the market. So maybe at early stage, we'll see some pickup. I'm hoping towards the end of the year, we'll see late stage start to, do better. I'm hoping this year is better than the last, but I'm not expecting it to really sort of
no lift off.
No lift off yet.
No lift off yet. Rahul, what about you?
Well, look, I think we invest in sort of 4 core themes and then emerging themes. Amongst the 4 core themes, which is enterprise SaaS, Fintech, commerce, and consumer, we believe there is enough of a rich vein of innovation that's happening in India, right? And I think founders are attacking each of these themes at different ends. Both to pick a consumer example, there are people attempting commerce right at the top with premium, and there are people attempting it for the Bharat audience, right? And I think there's enough innovation happening across the 4 sectors, but interestingly also in emerging sectors like climate, AI is coming up. And so I believe, you've got to have a long-term perspective on the market. We don't make money in the short term. We are here for the long term. We've been patient, passionate believers in the market. And so I think, as passionate believers in the ecosystem, it's our job to continue to help innovation foster, and in the process, do a good job for our LPs.
Well, yes, that certainly would be the ask of you. But Bejul, let me end by asking you. Harsha talked about the learning, so let's get you to conclude with what's been the single most sort of significant learning through this period of exuberance and now resetting and recalibration.
Yeah, I think it's a reminder that ultimately business fundamentals really, really matter. And I think in times of exuberance, it's easy to forget that and over-optimize for growth. That is what happened. In doing that, the most challenging problems don't get solved because money, in a sense, gets thrown, at those problems, and it papers over, whether something is really working or not. I'd say, that's a really significant learning. And before we wrap, I just also wanted to answer this question. I thought you were going to let me answer it too.
Go ahead.
Shireen, the financing markets, I think this year, as it relates to private markets for technology, will remain tough. It is a great time to build. Those of us that are building now, all the young Turks watching your program are building for the next decade and beyond.
Yeah.
We cannot kind of over-index on what is happening this year. At times like this, really passionate founders still draw capital. There's less competitive intensity. There's less noise. There's less copycats. There's less irresponsible behavior. It's a great time to build.
It's a great time to build, and that is the perfect note then to end this conversation. Bejul, Rahul, Harsha, many thanks for joining us. We wish you the very best of luck with liftoff, as well as for the year ahead, and we look forward to more conversation through 2024. Well, you've heard it from the team here at Lightspeed Ventures. From all of us here on Young Turks, for now, thanks very much for watching. A quick break. There's a lot more coming up. Don't go anywhere. We're back in a moment.